Welcome into the College Football Power Hour. That's Adam Breneman. He is Jason Fitz, and I am Caroline Fenton. And in Ohio State, Oregon, it was like the Stefan from Weekend Update on SNL kind of college football game. Like, this game has everything. A player got ejected for spitting on an opponent's face. We had a recovered onside kick that got bounced off of an Ohio State player. We had a wonky hold to try an attempt of a 2-point conversion. It had everything, and it all came down to an Ohio State drive late in the fourth quarter, and Will Howard, Adam, committed the cardinal sin of quarterbacking to end that game, and Oregon wins at 32-31.
This game all comes down to situational awareness in football and clock management. Will Howard's a guy that's played so much college football, has won a bunch of big games, has played in Big 12 championship games, and then to mismanage the end of the game the way he did was honestly shocking. You could see it on his face at the end of the game. Just hard to even believe. The first mistake was after the offensive pass interference penalty, not knowing that the clock is going to run when the pass gets completed inbounds. It's an offensive penalty. They're going to start the clock on the ref's whistle. Ohio State wasted 10 seconds before they snapped the ball there. That one is also on the coaching staff. That's on Ryan Day. That he's got to know that. They should have taken their timeout right there, take their final timeout, and now they can control the clock the way they want to by getting the ball out of bounds, getting a first down. They can spike the football if they get a first down. Everything's in front of them. Then for Will Howard, he knew how much time he had. He just missed that. He just calculated how long 6 seconds was incorrectly in his head. And you could see it as soon as he slid, he knew that it was longer than that. Will Howard has to be more aware. But for Oregon, this is a welcome to the Big Ten moment for Oregon, to show that they are dominant enough to win this game, to show they have the defense. And then Dillon Gabriel. Everyone's been sleeping on Dillon Gabriel. I've said it repeatedly on this show. They started off slow, but Dillon Gabriel is a dog. He played like it. 350 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, ran for a touchdown. This Oregon team is legit, and they were without one of their better playmakers, a wide receiver who got kicked out of the game for spitting on an opponent, and their tight end Terrence Ferguson had a great day. So it was fun to watch for Oregon, and you got to be happy for Dan Lanning.
So never too early to get snarky, so I'll just ask, how's that Will Howard Heisman campaign there going? I'm just curious.
I kind of took credit there for that. I switched it to Dillon Gabriel talk. You like that? I kind of avoided the Will Howard talk. Yeah.
Master class in avoiding the incorrect take.
This game taught us a lot that we're going to need to remember for the rest of the college football season for everybody. And to me, I'm still stung by the fact that we saw an experienced quarterback not manage the moments well. Because one thing in the transfer portal world I think matters more than ever is you're getting these transfer portal quarterbacks specifically because of these moments. Will Howard has to do a better job of that. Dillon Gabriel had to play the way that he played today. And it stuck in my head because, we're a week removed from watching the highlight over and over and over again of Nico Iamaleava running out of bounds and not giving his team a chance to win. I forgave that because that's a young quarterback. It's hard for me to have the same grace with Will Howard because he's seen enough college football. He's getting paid to be better at that position. That's just flat out honest to what happens and with the expectation. So as much as I'm being a little snarky here, I do think if I'm Ohio State, I'm looking around and thinking, man, yet again, Ryan Day in a big game, and Will Howard didn't have that situational awareness you want. You hope he learns from it, but with the margins this thin, this is one of those moments, this is a good learning lesson for everybody that in a college football playoff game, that's how a season's going to end.
Yeah, no doubt. And we talked about this game in our midweek podcast, and we looked at Dillon Gabriel. We've talked so much about how we just can't quite trust this Oregon team, and the list of the reasons why Dillon Gabriel was at the top of that list. You never knew when Dillon Gabriel might commit the fatal mistake or might commit the fatal turnover. It was kind of the same conversation with Will Howard over the last 3 games. Before this Oregon game, he turned the ball over 3 times, and it didn't matter in those instances because Ohio State did enough that one mistake, one blunder, one turnover didn't cost them. Well, it was one major mistake that did in fact cost them today. Now, looking at, teams that we trust or quarterbacks that we trust, I still don't know how much I truly trust this Oregon team and how much I truly trust Dillon Gabriel, but they needed him to play a clean game, and that's exactly what he did. And when he needed to step up in big moments, he very much so did. So when it comes to my trust meter of Dillon Gabriel, it went up a whole lot more today in their biggest game of the season so far.
There's really two things that make me feel good about Oregon moving forward. One is how they ran the football. They ran the ball for 155 yards. Dillon Gabriel had a big run on the ground for a touchdown. That's an area that Oregon struggled early in the season. Their offensive line struggled. And to run the ball the way that they did against Ohio State, one of the best defenses in the country, was impressive. They also held Ohio State to 4 of 12 or 13 on third down. Really good third down numbers. Oregon had pass rushers that got after Will Howard. They were great in those third down moments, which, again, Ohio State, in my opinion, is the best roster in the country. The best roster money can buy you in college football. And if we're going to play that way, the way they did, I thought makes me feel good about Oregon down the stretch in the Big Ten. But here's the reality. Both these teams are college football playoff teams, and they could very easily meet again, whether it be the Big Ten title, whether it be in the playoff. That was the highest level football game I have seen played this season. So hats off to the Big Ten. I know you're both SEC people. Big Ten with the best football game yet of the year.
I'm getting looped in with SEC people here. Look.
Carolina's LSU.
I just got offended by you calling me an SEC person while also saying, well, what about that Alabama-Georgia game? That was the game of the year. That was the game of the season.
Great game. This was the highest level of football. The best play by two teams in one game was this game. Way better than the Alabama-Georgia game, in my opinion, from a football standpoint.
To that point, we always play if these two teams played 10 times, X team would win X number of these games. I'll go back to that. If Ohio State and Oregon play this game 10 times, I think it's 50-50.
Yeah.
It was such an evenly matched game. And, we're here, splitting hairs and talking about one bad decision made by Will Howard. And it just happened to be in a had-to-have-it moment. Like, if you just break down the numbers, Fitz, it felt like such an evenly matched game. And I think that we could expect, and goodness after tonight, I hope, we see these two teams in the Big Ten title game.
Yeah, I think one of the big differences between this game and what we saw in Alabama-Georgia, Alabama-Georgia was this wave of momentum, right? It was this ebb and flow in the game. This was two punchers just like going at each other. And it never felt like anyone ever really had or lost momentum. I thought it was really impressive, by the way. Dan Lanning, who continues as a head coach, I just think impressed me in general. Just the onside kick decision was an aggressive one at that point in the game, right? And it was a non-necessary aggressive decision, and God, did it pay off. Like, I felt like it was such a great sign of how Oregon was attacking this football game. And realistically, both of these teams were really on the attack. They were both trying to be aggressive in establishing what they wanted to accomplish, Adam.
I thought the best decision of the game for Dan Lanning was the decision to kick the field goal on their final drive on the 2-yard line when Ohio State had the great goal line stand on defense. You think about last year's games with Oregon and Washington, the game they had last year where Dan Lanning went for it on fourth down like every single time on the goal line, didn't take the points, and Oregon ended up losing that game. I thought in the moment there for Dan Lanning to have some self-reflection and to kick the field goal, take the lead, and say it's now on the defense. Our defense is good enough to stop the Ohio State offense, and Dan Lanning played that perfectly from the start. But it just was a great football game of execution of two really good teams, of two quarterbacks who – the reality is those two quarterbacks went to their schools to win a national championship. That is why they did it, and both of them are getting paid millions of dollars a year to win a national championship. And both these teams, despite Ohio State's loss, they're both very much still in the picture to win a national title.
But I'm also, Adam, thinking a little bit about what you said last week when I was talking about the fact that none of these games really mean anything because the college football playoff will take care of itself. You did point out how important we're eventually going to remember a bye in home field is. And I was thinking about this in this game. Like, this game plays out differently if it's in Columbus, right? This game plays out differently, the vibe of the entire thing. And Oregon, I think, they capture the moment, they seize the opportunity. But I walk away from it also saying, Caroline, that this is a truly important reminder to everybody that while we are in this mindset of trying to figure out what it all means moving forward, one thing we know is that Oregon gave themselves an edge that could help them get home field advantage. And the opportunity to play there, the opportunity to make East Coast teams go west to play is just, it makes a difference. It's different on their body clock. It's different on everything about the way they do business. So I think the opportunity to make people come to Oregon is one of the things that really was cemented in this and could be a huge part of how Oregon's season plays out.
Well, I saw a stat that before the games on Saturday, Big Ten teams were 1 in, I think, 10 was the stat of teams that had to travel 2 or more time zones in order to play. So obviously Oregon got the edge there today. Penn State had to travel to LA. They got the edge over USC today. Back to the point about Dan Lanning and some of his tactical decision-making. Whenever you have a coach that is risky or maybe a more, forward-thinking, progressive coach that likes to go for it on 4th down, that, likes to go for 2, it's really fun when it works. And it really sucks when it doesn't. And I think young coaches, Lane Kiffin is an example of that, to bring it back to the SEC, as I am, in fact, an SEC homer. Dan Lanning, I think, is a great example of that as you continue to learn. When is it time to be really aggressive? And when is it time to be conservative? And I think the best way to judge a coach's decision-making is, how did you feel in that moment? Not what the outcome was. It doesn't make it a good call to do something if it worked. It's a good call if it's a good call. If you would put yourself in that position and say, that's something that I would do. It's not a bad coaching decision if it doesn't work. Sometimes it just doesn't work, but it was the right call to make. And I think that the onside kick was a really risky one. Maybe not a decision that I would have made, but it's that risky decision making that could give Oregon an edge in some of these games, but could also cost Oregon down the line. But if you're going to make it, you have to be wholeheartedly true to yourself and your decision-making at that time, and be okay if it does cost you moving forward.
I'll add on to your Dan Lanning point, Caroline, is there are things Oregon has to clean up. And that final drive of the game, for Oregon to have 12 guys on the field on an absolute critical moment is inexcusable at every level of football, especially when you're the number 3 ranked team in the country. I mean, that
coming
was
off a timeout, too.
Coming off timeout. I couldn't even believe it. I was shocked at what I was watching. And when the corner ran on the field at the last second, I'm like, they got to have 12. Just can't believe it happened. Trayshawn Holden to get thrown out of the game for spitting on an opponent is mind-bogglingly stupid. Dan Lanning was fuming. And then to go in the tunnel, throw your helmet into the locker room, I mean, just bad ball all the way around. And Dan Lanning's got some things to clean up. That's a football team that they got lucky in this game, right? Holm against Ohio State. Will Howard made mistakes. Ohio State should have been in a position to kick a field goal to win that game. It would have came down to the kicker. So Dan Lanning should be talking to his team and being like, you guys got out of here lucky. Stop making these mistakes, because that's bad ball.
But can we also say, if you're Ohio State, you're sitting in there. If you're Ryan Day right now, you're saying, we didn't manage the clock well at the end of the game. We didn't make the most of the opportunities we had. We lost the turnover battle, and we had 8 penalties for 70 yards. And we still lost by 1 point, and we had the chance. We had the chance to win this game. I think that speaks to, we talk so much about what do we see and what does it mean. I think what we saw tonight, frankly, oversimplification here, is that Ohio State and Oregon look like the number 2 and number 3 teams in the country. Like, Frank, if I complain about the AP vote every week. If I had the AP vote this week, I wouldn't change anything about having Ohio State and Oregon number 2 and number 3 in the country. I would simply put Oregon at number 2. I'd put Ohio State at number 3, and I'd say, thank you. That's how the game came out. That's how we're going to play these things. Texas, Oregon, Ohio State. You're welcome, AP voters. Just call me. I've already got your top 3 done.
Perfect. Easy. Don't even need to watch the rest of the games, because why would you? But and this is where I really like the expanded playoff, because potentially maybe once upon a time in a 4-team playoff, a loss like this could disqualify Ohio State from the playoff altogether. This Ohio State team deserves, at least right now, through 7 weeks, even with a loss to Oregon, deserves to be in the playoff. They are a playoff caliber team. So this is where I like the expansion, because we can afford more losses, but we get to see more good teams that deserve to be in the playoff.
The worst part about this whole thing for Ohio State is they have a bye week next week. So this thing's going to sting. When we would have bye weeks, I would just pray that we would win so that practice wasn't as hard. So that, it's the worst when you go into a bye week, especially with a loss like the one they just had. Ohio State's going to be doing situational football drills the entire bye week. But now Ohio State gets the bye week, get healthy. They play Nebraska, and then a road trip to Penn State. That's going to tell us a lot about what kind of team Ohio State really is in 2024.
Maybe they'll spend the bye week learning like the Cliff's Notes on clock management. Just throwing that out.
They should.
Cliff's Notes on
just like a fun
what
little
happens
thing
after penalties.
Yeah,
just keep you busy throughout the bye week. But Ohio State still, I think, firmly is a Big Ten title contender, is a national title contender. This win for Oregon, though, gives them the edge in the conference. So Oregon wins it. A lot of other great games today, so we'll hit those coming up next. Okay, Adam, what did we learn this week?
I learned that Penn State's a legitimate national title contender. And I had concerns about Penn State going into this game with how they looked throughout the season with their offense. But Penn State traveled across 3 different time zones all the way to LA and beat USC in their home stadium. Championship teams find ways to win games in games like this. Every championship team has a game like the one Penn State had against USC. Down 2 touchdowns at halftime. Drew Aller, who's been so good at taking care of the football, threw 2 interceptions. Really 3, but one was on a Hail Mary. And that's what championship teams do. They find ways to win. So got to give James Franklin a ton of credit. He's been criticized for not winning in big games. This game was one of the biggest Franklin has had in his time at Penn State, especially with all the rumors around his name, the USC job for the last 5 years. And Penn State found a way to win. Tyler Warren, Penn State's tight end, is the best tight end in college football. 17 catches in this game, 200-plus yards, receiving touchdown, completed a pass playing quarterback. It was unbelievable. And then Drew Aller made plays when it mattered the most, ended up with almost 400 yards passing and came back from some of those mistakes. So Penn State is a real team. Fitz, I disagree with what you said earlier. I think Penn State should go into the number 3 ranked team in the country and pass Ohio State after Ohio State lost to Oregon. Penn State is that good, and they proved it against USC, a USC team that I think is really good this season despite their 3 losses.
We're just going to willy-nilly throw out the 3 losses? Who cares about those? Look, I agree with you that Penn State gets credit
3 losses in 7 weeks might be had.
I agree with you that Penn State gets credit for a tough win. A loss is a loss. We're saying, what are you like? Now we're a Big Ten apologist over here. What are we just like? Hey,
Maybe.
The 3 points rolled by 4 points. Look, my only thing with Penn State, and one of my buddies texted me, full disclosure, in the game, and was like, "God, there's no way Penn State's number 4." And then later on in the game, later on in the day, somebody texted me, one of my buddies, and said, "God, there's no way Alabama's number 7." The funny thing is to me, I'm looking at all of these teams outside of the 3 that we've seen truly, I think, great football from. Now, at this point, I'd say Oregon, Ohio State, and Texas, as I've mentioned, have my respect. I think everybody else is sure, yeah, you want to put them at 4? Yeah, that's it. There is such a small difference in my mind between where Penn State is and where Georgia is. And, they all have a fatal flaw. They all have something really weird I'm not comfortable with. They all have something I don't love. There is an element, I hear you, Adam, I think they were going to get the biggest punch you could ever get from USC. USC's back was against the wall. They were going to have to take a massive punch, and I was impressed with the way they won that game. It was kind of weird seeing Drew Aller not be particularly efficient with the football. I used the word efficient too much, but the interceptions were bad for him, and that's not something we're used to seeing. So also, then we can turn around and say, hey, they survived his worst day. This is an amazing thing. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about Penn State. Right? I think they're very good, but I don't think they're in the same class as the other 3 teams we've talked about.
Fitz, what did you learn?
I was gonna go to an SEC topic, but you know what? Adam, you just inspired me. You know what we've learned?
Double down, Fitz.
Boy, come on.
Let him know.
What have we learned?
We've learned that USC at this point's a joke. Like,
Oh.
you want to say that you give them respect? You know what I don't respect? Anybody that sits there and tells me they put on 1,400 pounds of bulk so they can compete in the Big Ten. Hell of a lot of good those Big Macs are doing you now. Like, Lincoln Riley gets paid over $100 million in his contract to lose 3 games this quickly? Like, it's okay to say this is a disaster, especially for a program that has a massive footprint. They have a recruiting edge on the entire West Coast if they could ever figure it out. They have great facilities. They have all the money you could possibly want. They have cachet of being in LA. And what has that gotten them? 3 losses. Like, I understand they lost to the number 4 team in the country, and there's no shame in losing to number 4 team in the country. There is shame, though, when it is your 3rd loss because you have 2 other losses that aren't good on this. So I'm just looking around thinking, hey, if we're paying Lincoln Riley $110 million plus to be the head coach, what exactly is he getting paid to do? He's getting paid to win national championships, not be a top 16 to 25 team. Like, and that's probably where USC belongs right now, is like number 15, 16 in the country. That's a failure for the expectations we had for Lincoln Riley and we always have for USC.
It's not even just losing to a top 5 team in the country and you gave it your best, good job, pat on the back. Everybody gets a cookie. It's the fact that USC had so many opportunities to win this game, and they said, no, thank you, Mr. Franklin. I would like you to have it. When you're leading 20-6 at home, and then you let Penn State right back into the game. And credit to Drew Aller, credit to Penn State for getting themselves back into this game. But you allow Penn State a 12-play, 75-yard drive in which they convert not just 1, but 2 4th and longs. Where's this 1,400 extra pounds that you put on in the offseason defensively? And when Drew Aller threw those interceptions, well, USC had to settle for field goals on both. I mean, Desmond Stevens had an interception that he returned for 42 yards, and then those next 3 plays, in totality, USC gained 2 yards. This is a Lincoln Riley offense. This is supposed to be kind of the calling card of his teams, is offenses and teams that can put up, crazy, gaudy numbers and yards and points. And we didn't see that. So for every opportunity that USC had to win this football game, winning the turnover battle, outgaining Penn State on the ground, they didn't. It just felt like it didn't need to be this difficult for Penn State, for USC, but credit to Penn State because they were able to make plays for themselves and make this more interesting.
I can't even imagine. It hurts my brain to think about how frustrated Lincoln Riley must be going to sleep tonight. I mean, he just must be just so fed up and frustrated with his team this season because in all 3 of their losses, they look like the much better team. I mean, and that's, I know it means nothing, but they look better than Michigan when they lost to Michigan. They were clearly better than Minnesota, but made mistakes and lost the game at the end on the questionable goal line call. And then Penn State, they look like Penn State. They look better than Penn State through the first 3.5 quarters of that game and then found a way to lose the game in overtime. So Lincoln Riley has to be fed up. If there's a bright side or any silver lining for USC, it's that they have one of the hardest schedules in the country. Had to play LSU in week 1. Got out with a win. Had to play Michigan, Penn State, Minnesota, Wisconsin early in the season. USC beat Wisconsin. And then throughout the rest of the year, they play Notre Dame. They got to play Nebraska. So USC has a tough schedule. And for Lincoln Riley, in this game against Penn State, they're without Eric Gentry, probably their best defensive player, second best defensive player after Kamari Ramsey. So there may be some bright spots moving forward for USC, but they're completely out of the playoff picture. And, Lincoln Riley has such a big contract, such a big buyout. He's not on the hot seat, but Lincoln Riley has to find ways to win some of these close games because the leash isn't going to be that long at USC next year and the year after. And I always in my mind go back to when I was at Arizona State coaching and we recruited people from California. We would just always say, like, California football is kind of soft. It's like not very physical. Like when you're in LA, there's a lot of other stuff to do. Are the players really that focused? And
it's avocado toast football.
Yeah, it's like, is it like I'd much rather have an offensive lineman from like Iowa. I do think there's challenges, but it's also one of the biggest brands in college football. So Lincoln Riley needs to figure it out.
Caroline, what did you learn?
Yeah, one thing that I think I learned today, and maybe it's not really what I learned, but just what continues this belief that I already had, is I still can't trust Tennessee. And this is so unfair of me to say in a game that they won, an SEC rivalry game against Florida that they won. But that was ugly. That was the kind of win that I think Tennessee fans can step back from and say, I don't feel any better. Now, I thought following up a loss on the road against an okay but not great and not ranked Arkansas team, that Tennessee was going to come back at home against Florida, which is, I think, one of the best rivalries in college football. You checkered Neyland Stadium, that you're going to be hungry, you're going to be mad, you're going to be pissed off, and you're going to be reminding everyone why they were talking about the Tennessee Volunteers, not just preseason, but throughout the entirety of this season so far before that Arkansas game. And it was stupid penalties. They struggled to move the football. Dylan Sampson only had maybe 50 yards and some change at halftime. They kind of struggled to run the football. For the second time in a row, Tennessee got shut out in the first half. They did that against Arkansas last week. That was the first time in a history of Josh Heupel as a head coach, not just at Tennessee, but going back to UCF as well, that one of his teams got shut out in the first half. And now it's happened twice. We see Nico Iamaleava continue to make some of these puzzling decisions. Obviously, he ran out of bounds against Arkansas, like you mentioned earlier, Fitz, and then the final possession of the game, final play of the game. So and credit Tennessee. They found a way to win. Florida missed the kick in overtime. They did what they needed to do to win this football game. Florida's not a very good team, and you're going to overtime with Florida. Arkansas is not a great team, better than I think we anticipated, and you lost to Arkansas. I'm just not seeing enough in SEC play from Tennessee for me to say, yes, this is absolutely a playoff contender. I can say today, I don't think that Tennessee is a national title contender. Can that change? They play Alabama next week. You win that game, all of a sudden things feel a lot different. But just right now, I'm not loving what I'm seeing from this Nico-led team.
Yeah, and by the way, for me, I think I was the champion of the Tennessee bandwagon for the first several weeks on this show. It pains me to jump off the bandwagon, but I am looking around saying, man, you see this level of inconsistency 2 weeks in a row in this current college football climate. It is concerning. To me, they don't seem to be flying around the way they were a couple of weeks ago. They do find themselves behind the chains repeatedly. And it feels like every time there's a big play, it gets wiped away, Caroline, to your point. And so I'm looking at a team right now that feels like it's just lost. And I don't know how you fix that. We talk about identity all the time. It was so clear what the identity and the culture of Tennessee football was in the first month of the season. And it is so clear that they've lost that right now. And if your get-right game is going to be against Alabama, who also needs a get-right game, all of this feels like it's gotten really ugly. There's too much talent for me to feel like they're out of it. But, Adam, the eye test is still the eye test, and they also don't look like they're playing at the level I would expect a top 10 football team to consistently be playing.
The concerning part is that despite the close win against Florida, who, Caroline, you said it, is bad. It's a bad football team. Billy Napier will not be the head coach of Florida next year. They lost every statistical battle that's important to a football game. So to me, that really means they got lucky and found a way to win the game, but lost the third down battle. Lost time of possession. It wasn't even close. Lost by 10 minutes in time of possession. Lost the penalty battle. Tied the turnover battle with Florida. Every important metric they lost to this Florida Gators team. And then you mentioned the efficiency, Fitz. Tennessee had 15 third downs in this game, 2 fourth downs. What that tells me is that they weren't efficient on first and second down. That's way too many third downs to be in the football game. You want to be getting first downs on first and second down, not on third and fourth down. So they're not ahead of the sticks, which means Nico's in bad situations. I mean, being in third down and long as a quarterback is tough. More turnovers happen then than any other down and distance. So this offense for Tennessee is not clicking, and they're losing the most important, the most critical parts of the football game: time possession, turnovers, penalties, things like that. They have a lot to clean up before next week's matchup with Alabama.
Look, I'm going to be consistent here, guys. I've been consistent about this. If you're a Big Ten fan and you're trying to hit me with, well, but it's always really hard to play at insert crappy Big Ten school. Like, yeah, I'm not buying it. And if you're coming in saying, oh, man, but like Caroline, I respect you. You're so right. The rivalry means so much. But let's be real. Florida football is an abject disaster right now. So I have no patience for Tennessee fans who come in and say, well, it's just always tough when you got to play Florida, Tennessee, Florida. You never know what's going to happen. Yes, you do. Good football teams beat bad football teams. That's what's supposed to happen. So, like, that's my standard. And I don't care whether we're talking about the ACC, the Big Ten, the SEC. I'm not buying any of you conference loyalists that are listening to it right now that are convinced that your team struggles, unless you're willing to also buy it. Then when you turn around and you're like, well, I don't know why. It's just always tough for, Ohio State to beat Iowa. Like, I'm not buying this. I am not buying this at all.
It just means more, Fitz. It just means more. But I have to think Graham Mertz got injured in the middle of this game. He came back out in street clothes on crutches. I hate to see that for him. I truly, really hope that he's going to be okay and he's going to be able to come back and finish out his final season. Wish him nothing but the best. But I have to think, well, what would have happened in this game had Graham Mertz not gotten hurt? What would have happened in this game if it was played in the Swamp and not in Neyland Stadium? But those things didn't happen. I mean, that's not reality. We can play the coulda, shoulda, woulda game all day long.
I do like that game.
It's a very fun game. We really, honestly, as sports talk show hosts, we kind of live in the coulda, shoulda, woulda world. But we shouldn't be talking about coulda, shoulda, woulda and splitting these hairs about how different this game could have gone with a Tennessee team that had college football playoff aspirations and still do.
Think about viewing this from the Florida lens. Just demoralizing for the Florida fan base. The Florida Twitter was not a pretty place to look at before we got on to film this show. I mean, my friends that are Florida fans were having epic breakdowns. Like, get Billy Napier the heck out of town. Just for the reason I said, you win every part of the game and then lose in overtime. Yes, your quarterback got hurt, but man, it just seems like nothing can go right for Billy Napier. Just nothing. Not a single thing ends up going the way that he wants it to. It's almost kind of depressing to watch Florida football.
You mean Florida football fans don't have a tremendous amount of patience and grace in their hearts? I had no idea. Who knew?
Who would have known?
I wouldn't have patience or grace if I were a Florida fan either. So I don't blame them. We're on year 3 of this. I do not blame them. We talk about Tennessee, Florida as a rivalry game. There's another big old rivalry game that we have yet to touch on. So we'll do that after a quick break. Dogs and puppies. After 7 weeks, we've got enough of a sample size where I feel like we can start to say, okay, you are a true dog, a true contender, or you are a pretender in a puppy. Adam, who's a dog this week?
My dog of the week, I'm going a little bit unconventional here. Arizona State Sun Devils with a huge Friday night win against Utah. I think Caroline was in attendance for that game, right?
I was in the house.
You were there?
I was at Sun Devil Stadium.
It was rocking.
It was insane. It was insane. And frankly, early on, it was a little bit empty. It was a little bit quiet. Credit to the student section. The student section was absolutely packed. They were all fired up. You can tell the kind of, life that Kenny Dillingham has breathed into this student section and into this fan base. But as the game went on, you really started to see it get super electrifying.
If you would have bet Arizona State's 4.5 wins over under preseason, that would have cashed in week 7. I mean, this week. And then Kenny Dillingham in his post-game press conference said to the press, if you bet Arizona State over 4.5 wins, please donate some of those winnings to our NIL collective. The guy's always recruiting.
Crazy.
And this really felt like a turning the page moment for Arizona State football to get to that winning stage where you win games like this against a team like Utah who's tough and physical. And Kenny Dillingham's a guy who's from Scottsdale, Arizona, who was going to be there for 20 plus years as their head coach. I truly believe it. Their new athletic director, Graham Rossini, has been public about wanting to build that program. Kenny Dillingham recruits as hard as anyone for a long time. You guys know I spent time there coaching. People have talked about Arizona State as a sleeping giant in college football. And man, if just someone could figure out how to win games, it's easy to recruit there. The fan base will love it. You got a massive media market. You're in a good conference now in the Big 12. It feels like Kenny Dillingham's onto something there. And he's got the players with Cam Scatabo as running back, had 2 touchdowns. He's got the players to make it happen. You got to be happy for Kenny Dillingham, the youngest head coach in college football, 32 years old. Incredible.
Yeah, a big win, by the way, over a Utah team that, frankly, I think has gotten a lot of, we talk about benefit of the doubt. We've given the brand of Utah football a lot of benefit of the doubt, and the team on the field this year hasn't lived up to that. Like, this has not been what we're used to. We have this concept of Utah still plays tough physical football, and they're explosive, and they can do anything from anywhere. Not this Utah team. This Utah team, I mean, there's a big win for Arizona State, and you're right. I love you giving them a little bit of love on a no less. I got a fly coming in my face. I love you giving them a little bit of love, no less, for a Friday night, because I think a lot of people were maybe paying attention to baseball, didn't see it. So I like that call a lot for a dog.
Baseball?
Yeah,
who watches baseball over college football? Is that a thing?
Well, I mean, Arizona State versus Utah, like plenty of people, Dodgers, Padres. I don't know if you've heard of them. Like they're doing pretty well.
It was such a jump scare as I'm, just online all day long on a Saturday, watching games, looking at box scores, checking Twitter. It's like a jump scare whenever I see a Cleveland Guardians update. I'm like, no, this is a day sacred only to college football. None of your baseball tweets. But no, credit to Kenny Dillingham. That game was awesome. It was my first ASU home game experience. So good call. Well, who is your puppy, Adam?
I'm going with Alabama and Georgia as my puppies this week.
Ooh.
The SEC hate continues.
SEC hate continues, but hear me out. After watching their games today, both teams get wins, but both questionable victories. At least one of these two teams is missing the college football playoff. Both teams don't have the depth like we're used to them having. And I've defended Alabama on this show a lot. I defended them and why they should be ranked ahead of Georgia, but man, I am not seeing it from Alabama against South Carolina today. They did not look good. Jalen Milroe had 2 interceptions. They were 5 of 12 on third down. Did not get the job done. Now, got away with the win, but did not play the Alabama brand of football. Then for Georgia, I mean, think about their season. The 1-point win against Kentucky, the loss to Bama, struggling with the worst team in the conference, Mississippi State today. Just not good for these two teams. And there's too many mistakes both these teams are making for both of them to control their own destiny and both make the playoffs. So that's my prediction. One of them is going to miss the playoff. And if you're an Alabama or a Georgia fan, you're not going to sleep tonight feeling very good about how the rest of the season is going to go.
So to be clear, Penn State win over an unranked team is gutsy and something we should praise. And Georgia and Alabama surviving against unranked teams are reasons that we should question everything about them.
USC, better, much, much, much better team than Mississippi State and South Carolina.
I would take South Carolina. I would take Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard over any defensive player wearing a USC uniform.
And USC was like
the other USC.
Number 12 ranked team in the country at one point this year. They were pretty high.
At one point, what are we doing?
Michigan was also a top 10 team at one point, to be fair.
Mississippi State is the worst team in the SEC. Probably worse than Vanderbilt now.
Probably. Absolutely. Put some
absolutely worse than Vanderbilt. Yeah, true.
On Vanderbilt's name, who just beat Kentucky at Kentucky on Saturday night. Give them some credit.
So maybe we can take some of the respect off of Kentucky's name now that they lost the event. I'm just here stirring everybody. That's all.
But it's also the entire resume, to use a common word we hear committee people talk about. Like, we're talking about a Georgia team that I just told you, 1-point win against Kentucky, lost to Bama. Like, it's more than just this game for the reasons I feel that way. Same with Alabama, the loss to Vanderbilt, the almost losing to South Florida. Penn State went on the road to USC, beat a USC team that was top 15 in the country at one point, and has dominated every other team they played this season.
I'm just here stirring. I'm just here stirring things up. I will say
you're stirring it up. You're getting, don't come at the Big Ten like that. I get all riled up.
I will say this though. I feel like today I kept watching Alabama saying, "Yeah, this is what I expected." And I know I fell in love with what we saw for one half against Georgia. But, man, this Bama team is not right. Like, this Bama team is not locked in. This Bama team is not playing with the level of focus we expect from Alabama to play. And it was interesting even because I was driving around at one point while the game was on. So I had the Alabama radio broadcast on. And even just hearing the Alabama radio guys try and figure out how to negotiate what needed to happen for Alabama to start to pull away made me think about how different this landscape is right now. Like this is not last year's, but this is not Nick Saban's Alabama. And I'm going to keep hammering that point home because I think that's okay. Like one thing is that the Bama fans get so worked up over that. Like it's hate. It's not. Like this is Kalen DeBoer's Alabama. And in order for Kalen DeBoer to put his stamp on what this Alabama team is going to look like, it's going to take some time. They're going to have to win games that look like this, and they're going to have to establish what it looks like to be Alabama without Nick Saban's presence absolutely everywhere. Do I think they're as locked in? No. Do I think they're as good? No. Do I think they're as focused? No. Do I think eventually they can get there? Yeah, but this is that exact weakness, that crack in the armor that we sat there and said, man, like you're talking about an Alabama team that had to survive a 2-point conversion, and he was open. Like the quarterback, good on him for getting the pressure. Quarterback had the opportunity and then gave up an onside kick. Like I'm watching this thinking none of this feels like Alabama.
And this isn't just, let's be hard on a top 10 team. Let's be hard on Alabama because they played it close against, an SEC opponent. This is now, 10 of Alabama's last quarters where they have not played very well. The second half against Georgia, they converted 1 third down and averaged 1.2 yards per carry. That got overshadowed by a massive win against the number 2 team in the country, but maybe it overshadowed Alabama's warts just a little bit too much. That got revealed in a loss against Vanderbilt. That was not fluky in any way. And then you have 4 quarters of Alabama struggling to stay in the game against South Carolina and needing some South Carolina mistakes in order to win this football game. Now, I think that a lot is being made of the Nick Saban era versus sample size that we have from Kalen DeBoer. That I saw so many tweets of, Kalen DeBoer has this big smile on his face post-game versus Nick Saban never looked happy, even if they dominated games. I don't really know how much it matters. It's different. We knew that. We knew Kalen DeBoer was going to run this program differently. We knew that he had a different temperament. But this is just what happens when you're under a microscope at a program like Alabama and you are not competing to Alabama standards. We talked about this last week against Vanderbilt. Everyone was bitching and moaning about the t-shirt that Kalen DeBoer was wearing. It didn't matter. But this is what happens when you fall short of a standard is everything gets picked apart and criticized, Adam.
I'm a big credit where credit's due guy, so I want to give Jason Fitz credit for predicting this before the season started, predicted the Alabama struggles. I thought he was absolutely crazy, and he was right. So, Fitz, congratulations. It came true. Alabama is not the same team without Nick Saban.
I do believe that Alabama has time to get it right, but boy, they got to figure it out now. Caroline, can I give you a dog? Can I bring it back up to positivity?
Yes, you can.
All right. Like this is, I think it's time for us to loudly say this. Like I know it was a trash opponent, but I watched some of that Clemson game today, and I kept thinking, that this is not what we thought was going to happen. Like I'll take the credit, but I'll also admit when I was wrong. Like, and I thought Clemson was going to be left for dead, and all I kept thinking about when you watch them wipe the floor with Wake Forest. Wake Forest stinks. It's not about that. It's just about watching and saying, yeah, this is a good football team. I don't care who they're playing. That level of domination, the way as easy as they're making it look right now, it feels like they're getting their rhythm. They've got the preseason out of them. They've established who they are. Kate Klubnik playing really well right now, Adam. I'm looking at this Clemson team and I'm thinking, maybe it's time to admit that they are a dog and that they are in this college football playoff conversation.
Man, you're so right. I'm glad you're giving Clemson the dog status this week because they have played so well since that Georgia game in week 1. And you look back at that Georgia game in week 1 where they ended up losing 34-3. It was 0-0 end of the first quarter. It was 6-0 at halftime. Then they got ran out of the stadium in the second half. But they played one bad half of football this year. Every other game, every other half has been dominant for Clemson. And Cade Klubnik is truly playing like one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He threw for 300-plus yards today. He threw for 3 touchdowns. He has been fun to watch. He's in command. To use your word, Fitz, he's been efficient throwing the football. just really good all the way around. And man, we gave a lot of crap to Clemson when they lost to Georgia, but this Clemson team is truly coming together at the right time, and they are in the driver's seat completely to be the ACC champion, and they look like the best team in the conference with how Miami's pulled out a couple close games.
We talked whenever Texas A&M last week clobbered Missouri. We talked about how at least me, I can say for myself, but I kind of feel like I'm speaking for a lot of college football society as a whole. We just counted out Texas A&M because they lost to Notre Dame week 1. And so then we just kind of put them on the back burner and just kind of counted them out. We shouldn't have. And we learned our lesson against Missouri. I think that's kind of what we're experiencing here with Clemson. That when they kind of got run out of the building against Georgia in the second half, we all just collectively forgot about Clemson. But the difference is with Clemson's schedule and with the ACC being as non-competitive as maybe we expected it to be, Clemson isn't going to get that opportunity on more of a national stage in a game with more eyes against a top 10 opponent to say, no, we are for real and you counted us out too early, which is why I'm really glad that you gave them their due. Because you also get credit for beating up on bad teams. Like when you've got bad teams on your schedule and you take care of business against them, that's the only thing that you can do. And Clemson absolutely looks like a college football playoff contender. And
you look at their schedule the rest of the year, Virginia, Louisville, Virginia Tech, Pitt, the Citadel, and South Carolina. There's a real likelihood they're favored in every single one of those games by a wide margin and could be an 11-1 Clemson team. So they things are looking good for Clemson football right now, and everyone was calling for Dabo's head after week 1.
Who's a puppy, Fitz?
All right. Now, let's be honest. I have no class. And the phrase like act like you've been there before, I don't ever live by. I'm like, hey, appreciate it like it's the only moment you might ever have it. So I say this with grace. But my puppy this week is Oregon fans. Here's what I don't understand. I don't understand why are we storming the field when like you've been in national championships, you've been in playoffs, you are a dominant college football program that just beat another team by like that you're comparably ranked with. Storming the field is what you do when your team sucks, all right? And your team has always sucked, and you've never seen a win like this before. So you storm the field, you rip down the goalpost. If you're Vandy and you're 0-60 against top 5 teams, you storm the field. If you're Liberty and you pull off a huge upset against an actual football team, if you ever choose to play one, you storm the field. If you're Memphis and you turn around and somehow you beat Penn State, you storm the field. I get all of these. Like if you're UNLV and you pull off a massive win somewhere, you storm the field. If you're Oregon,
take a shot. UNLV reference.
Like you don't need. Thank you. You're welcome. If you're Oregon, all you did was beat like the team that frankly is on comparable level. You don't storm the field for comparable level wins. Like you don't just go out there willy-nilly field storming, ripping goalposts down if you already belong in that tier. Like you steal the China when you've never had China. If you have China, you don't steal the China. This just feels like it's out of place to me.
The fun police are here. The fun police are here. They want none of the kids to have fun in college. Let the kids have fun, Fitz. I mean, they beat Ohio State at home. Primetime matchup.
They beat Ohio State. So the number 3 team beat the number 2 team at home. Both have teams that have actually played in national championships against each other, played a regular season game that's completely meaningless to how this season's going to end up. There'll be no banners hung. There'll be no memory of it. Like ESPN stats and info department won't even turn around and make a special category for this win. This won't be a footnote. Like there won't be an asterisk since 2024 when Oregon beat Ohio State. Like none of these things. It was just a really good football game. If we start storming the field every time you win just a really good football field, storming the field no longer has value.
Do you hear that sound?
Yeah.
It almost sounds like Fitz sucking the fun out of everything. Because
I agree.
I had the opportunity when I was in college. I got to storm the field, and it was a good team beat a higher ranked, better team. And whenever anyone asks me, what was one of your favorite memories of college? What was one game that when you were a student that stands out to you? I always say 2018 LSU Georgia, because I got to storm the field. And LSU beat a top 3 team, an undefeated Georgia team, and LSU went on to a New Year's Six Bowl that year, but I got to storm the field. And I have pictures of myself with players on the field. I got to pick up some Tiger Stadium grass and do a full, less miles and eat a little bit of it. I will always cherish that memory. And if there was some old curmudgeon at home that was saying LSU students are lame for rushing the field, that's fine. Call me lame all day long, because I cherish that memory. And not everybody gets the opportunity to do that. Not everybody gets the opportunity to go to Vanderbilt and watch them beat the number 1 team in the country. So if it feels fit, go ahead and do it. Is there a certain field storming decorum that should, probably take place? Maybe. I don't know, but go at it. You're not footing the bill. That's $100,000 out of the athletic department's pocket, not mine.
It could go towards, the next year's quarterback. I'm just the old man here. You're screaming into the sky, saying, I am the old man on this show. All right, Caroline, give us your dog.
My dog is Texas.
Dawg.
And maybe Fitz is going to say, well, you can't say that Texas is a dog because they beat up on an unranked team that they should beat up on. And you know what? To that, I say Alabama, Vanderbilt, Tennessee, Arkansas, all of these national title contenders, college football playoff contenders that we've seen get trapped against these teams, against unranked teams, and lose in games that they were supposed to win. And this is a rivalry game. We know that weird things happen in the Red River rivalry all the time. We saw it last season. Oklahoma was a good team. Texas was a college football playoff team. And we saw Texas lose to Oklahoma last year. So in a year of college football that we're seeing so many weird things happen, we're seeing top teams show their vulnerability. Texas took care of business today. I think the most impactful thing that I saw today was Quinn Ewers got off to kind of a rough start. First possession, he throws a bad pick, follows it up with 2 punts, went 3 and out on the next 2 possessions. And then their next 4 possessions, they found the end zone in 3 of them. So even in a day where Quinn Ewers got off to a rough start and didn't look his best, he settled in and was able to take care of business. In the first 3 possessions, when Texas looked a little bit shaky and Oklahoma could have taken advantage of that, Texas's defense really stepped up and makes some big plays. So in a world of college football where everyone's shown some warts, everyone has shown some weaknesses, Texas continues to prove to me that in an instance where they could have been vulnerable, they weren't, and they absolutely whooped Oklahoma in a game that inexplicable things happen. So Texas just continues to prove to us why they're the number 1 team in the country.
I want to thank Texas for making something easy. Like nothing's been easy in this year in college football. It's easy. The number 1 team in the country is clearly Texas, and it's not even close. So, thank you. It's easy. We know this. And I think you're right. Everything you said about Quinn Ewers is really smart, and that's well broken down by you. The only thing I would add to what was impressive to me for Texas was their defensive line. Just absolutely, they dominated this game in a way that just is stuck in my head. I think it was 5 sacks, 11 tackles for loss. I mean, but you are talking about every time it felt like Oklahoma even tried to hand the ball off, the interior of Texas defensive line was in the backfield before the running back could get the ball. There is so much speed, explosiveness, athleticism out of that Texas defense front 7. Golly, every snap, Adam, I felt like it's like, you know what? In a world where I'm constantly saying who's great in college football, Texas. Yeah. Texas is great.
This Texas team is on a completely different level than anybody else in the SEC, and I'll say in college football. After this performance today, when everyone else kind of survived in their game, the sign of an elite roster at Texas is that they could plug in Arch Manning over the last 2 weeks, not skip a beat. Then Quinn Ewers comes right back in today, starts a little bit slow, as you said, Caroline, then gets right in the rhythm, has a rushing touchdown, cruises to a 34-3 victory in a rivalry game against an Oklahoma team that people thought was going to be pretty good. So Texas has that talent and the skill to be able to play like that, and no matter who's at quarterback, win big games. The difference with this Texas team, though, to your point, Fitz, is the defense is unbelievable. Texas has allowed, listen to this, 42 points in 6 games this season, 7 points a game allowed. Unreal. Oklahoma had under 100 yards rushing today. So combine that defense with a quarterback like Quinn Ewers, with the talent they have all over in the skill position spots. Their offensive line is the best in the country. This Texas team is by far and away the number 1 team in America.
No doubt. No doubt. Now, a puppy, a game that just went final as we've been recording the pod. Anybody that has to go into Tiger Stadium at night in a sold-out crowd, puppy. Because Ole Miss, I think, just bear witness to the weird voodoo that happens in that stadium once the sun goes down, because LSU wins that one in overtime and had no business losing that game. I mean, Ole Miss outgained LSU. Ole Miss more than doubled up LSU on the ground. Ole Miss won the time of possession battle. They tied the turnover battle, yet they still found themselves in this situation. I mean, Ole Miss's defense held LSU's offense for really a majority of that first half. LSU's offense had zero answers for what Ole Miss's defense was throwing at them, yet they still find a way to lose that one. So good luck to anybody who plays in that stadium at night, because it's a funky little place. It's a strange place. Weird things happen, but magical things happen for us LSU fans as well.
I did not have Ole Miss being 1-2 in conference play after 3 SEC games on my bingo card for 2024. But
yeah,
man, just not a good start to the season for Jackson Dart. Threw a bad pick today in that game. Lane Kiffin. There's going to be some chatter at Ole Miss now. There's going to be some chatter. But here's my question: Is LSU good? Like, is LSU?
No.
I still can't decide.
No. Good enough.
Is LSU a good team?
No.
No. Don't say it.
I don't know what
5-1.
it is. I mean, they beat a top 10 Ole Miss team. They found a way to win the South Carolina game that they were trailing 17-0. I don't want to say that LSU is a lucky team, because I don't think that you get this lucky in games like this. I can't say that they're a good team, because they haven't done anything that's easy. Even against UCLA a couple of weeks ago. I mean, UCLA's offense looked championship caliber against LSU's defense, and UCLA is not very good. So I can't say that they're good, because nothing's been easy. Nothing has come easy for this team, but they just seem to figure it out, and it's always uncomfortable.
I think the expectation is part of what we have to understand with this conversation, too, because there weren't a lot of people that thought LSU was going to be a national championship contender this year, right? So wherever they are, it feels like, hey, this is good. Like, LSU's having a good season. I can't say the same thing about Ole Miss. This was supposed to be a team that was prepared to compete for a natty. Like, this was supposed to be a team that was on the verge of being being able to take down the Ohio States and Oregons. And if you watched today, and it was interesting tonight, because I had the 2 games on side by side. And as I was watching the 2 games, I thought, man, the glaring, alarming difference between what I'm seeing on this screen versus what I'm seeing on that screen is such a reminder of the difference between, is my team good enough to make the playoffs, or is my team actually good? And we thought Ole Miss this year was going to be actually good. I watched good football tonight. It was Oregon, Ohio State. I watched painfully difficult football with Ole Miss and LSU, and it doesn't mean it wasn't a good game. It was a fun game. It's just, you watch it, you're like, God, this doesn't even feel like the same sport. So this season has become a total disappointment and a total failure for Ole Miss, for Jackson Dart, and for Lane Kiffin.
Fair to say Ole Miss is no longer a playoff contender?
They go.
2 losses.
They go.
Hey,
and they still got Georgia on the schedule?
You want to know who still is a playoff contender? Notre Dame. Big win against Stanford.
Oh, God.
49-7.
Big win against Stanford. But
hey,
you know
we
what?
got a 5-1
Alabama's got some issues.
5-1 Notre Dame team. Toughest game of their schedule is USC, who you guys have called the worst team known to mankind.
Yeah,
so
they're not even going to get that game won't even have street cred anymore with the committee. They'll be like, by then USC will have 5 losses. It'll be like a 5-loss USC team. Heck of a win. Woo.
You know who else is a playoff contender?
Who?
Army.
Come on. I've been trying to tell
Army
you guys.
It's due.
6-0 Army team. Army's unbelievable. Unbelievable offense.
Best team in the
Unreal.
country.
I mean, one of the best.
This is when we start to get into the witching hour of the show. We just start throwing stuff out there just to see what everyone's reaction is going to be.
On the Army broadcast
wait,
today, I called the Army quarterback the most impactful player for their team in college football, and I started getting tweets at me like, "What an exaggeration that is!"
Yeah, just remember, just a wee bit.
But this is important. This is important because I just said USC will give them nothing. Notre Dame does play Army on November 23rd. Yeah. The Army game could turn out to be the game that Notre Dame needs.
Game of the century.
Game of the millennium.
Alabama, Georgia walked so Notre Dame Army could run.
and Notre Dame has Navy and Army this year, both Navy and Army undefeated. I mean,
yeah.
Navy,
so Notre Dame
Army,
could actually break
Vanderbilt.
the entire country's heart twice this year by taking down the service academy teams when they are playing so well. I like this plan that gets Army a home field, a first round bye, 4th overall seed, and a home game.
Have you seen the scenario of how Navy and Army could play each other back-to-back weeks? Have you heard about that? Like, if because Navy and Army play each other after the regular season ends, it's not part of the regular season for some reason. So, like, Navy and Army could both be the top 2 teams in the AAC. They are right now. Would play in the AAC championship, and then would play the next week as well for their regular season Navy Army game, 2 weeks in a row.
Surely we could make that a twofer.
Yeah, 1 game for 2.
Yeah. That, just change up the rules a little bit.
That would be unbelievable.
Every
I
touchdown
want to live in
is
America
worth 10
where
points.
like they both make the playoffs too, and then they have a first round playoff game against. Give us 3 straight weeks of Army and Navy. Let's see how
That'd be
committed
amazing.
everybody really is to America.
I mean, Texas and Army in the playoffs. That's what this country was founded on. God bless America.
If you're Texas and Army makes the college football playoff, do you feel bad about what you do to them there? Like, is there a spot where you're like, sorry guys, man, like I just thank you for your service, but by the way, we're about to do this. It's an ultimate sign of respect when you give your opponent a butt whipping. I think you gave it your all. You don't hold back.
America.
That's going to do it for us today. You can follow us on Twitter. He's at Adam Breneman 81. That's at Jason Fitz. I'm at Caroline Fenton 1. Always appreciate y'all for stopping by the podcast, telling your friends about the podcast, liking it, reviewing it, commenting on it, giving us a little bit of love. Tell a friend, tell an Army fan, tell a USC fan maybe if they are feeling really bad about themselves and just want to hear us rip their team. We'll be back on Tuesday night and Wednesday morning with a full look ahead to the Week 8 action of college football. We're out.